My name is Luisa, and I am 22 years old today. I want to share with you a story that marked a before and after in my life. A story of infidelity that plunged me into a whirlwind of emotions and unexpected changes. But before we get into those details, allow me to introduce myself and contextualize how everything began. Until recently, my life was what you could call normal. For the most part, I was in a stable relationship with my boyfriend Mateo for 2 years. We were a couple like any other, sharing moments, dreams, and challenges. Mateo was the perfect boyfriend, attentive, loving, and always did everything possible to make me feel special. Until one day, everything changed. It was at that crucial moment when Mateo decided to introduce me to his family, especially his father Juan, when everything took an unexpected turn. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary situation, but it is not. However, that meeting marked the beginning of something that Mateo's father would never have imagined. He appeared to be a respectable man with a friendly smile and a good sense of humor. His outward appearance did not reveal anything out of the ordinary. However, from the moment we met, something in his gaze made me feel uncomfortable. I cannot help but think that his eyes were inappropriately scrutinizing me, as if he were evaluating me from top to bottom. That look suggested that there was something else on his mind, something that I could not decipher, and that planted in me a growing feeling of uneasiness. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking that perhaps I was exaggerating, misinterpreting his intentions. But over time, that persistent feeling did not disappear. I began to notice that Juan found excuses to be near me, whether at family gatherings or when we would go to visit his house sometimes. Our conversations seemed more personal than they should be, and his compliments became more and more suggestive. All this had me confused and worried why my boyfriend's father was acting this way. And how could I, at 22 years old, deal with this awkward situation without causing problems in the relationship with Mateo? I didn't know what to do about it. As time went on, the situation with Mateo's father got worse. His compliments, although subtle, they became more frequent. He always found a reason to compliment me, whether it was my appearance, my personality, or even my intelligence. It was as if he was trying to seduce me, but he did it in a way that no one else would notice. I loved Mateo deeply, and I didn't want to ruin our relationship, but I felt uncomfortable and scared by the attention inappropriate that Juan offered me. There were moments in which I blamed myself for thinking badly of him, but his behavior did not stop being disturbing every time we went to Mateo's house. The tension in the air was felt. Juan kept staring at me, and his insinuations became more shameless. He whispered compliments in my ear, when no one else could hear, and his hands occasionally brushed mine in a suggestive way. It was as if he was constantly evaluating how far he could go. Before I objected, I was in a challenging dilemma. I did not know how to approach this situation without unleashing a scandal, familiar or irreparably damaging my relationship with Mateo. I felt trapped in a dangerous game from which I could not find the exit. Each movement seemed to take me closer to the edge without a clear route of escape in sight. A part of me wanted to confront Juan, directly tell him that his behavior was unacceptable and that he should stop. But I was afraid of the possible consequences, and if this would ruin the relationship between father and son, and if Mateo didn't believe me or got angry with me. Another part of me thought about hiding the situation and waiting for the man to get tired or stop on his own. But that only increased my feeling of vulnerability and made me feel like I was betraying my boyfriend by not telling him the truth. The internal struggle was exhausting. I didn't know who to turn to for advice, and I felt more and more isolated. The relationship with Mateo, that used to be my refuge, was being affected by my growing anxiety and confusion. My days became a constant dilemma. On one hand, there was Mateo, my sweet boyfriend, whom I loved with all my heart. For another, his father Juan, who seemed to be interested in me in a way that went beyond what was appropriate. And I was caught in the middle of this dangerous game without knowing how to handle it. Despite feeling uncomfortable, I must admit that the fact that Juan paid me so much attention made me feel special. At first, I repeated to myself that it was just a perception of mine, that maybe I was exaggerating. But over time, those moments of complicity between us became increasingly difficult to ignore. There were times when our eyes met, middle of a conversation at family dinner, and I felt a chill run down my spine. There was nothing explicit in those looks, but there was something in the way his eyes met mine that made my heart beat faster. I realized that somehow I had started to enjoy the attention that Juan was giving me, although I was overcome with a feeling of guilt in his way of making me feel desired and attractive. There was something magnetic and addictive despite being fully aware that it was wrong. I found myself longing for those moments of complicity, trapped in a web of contradictory emotions. The game continued, and I remained in a state of constant confusion. I worried that someone else in the family would notice the tension between Juan and me. But as far as I knew, we were the only ones aware of this uncomfortable secret. No one else seemed to realizing that there was more than just praise behind Juan's actions. The main problem was how to hide this situation from Mateo. I knew that I couldn't keep him in the dark forever, but I was afraid that if I told him the truth, our relationship would be irreparably affected. I felt that I was, and every day that passed the tension became more unbearable. Each meeting with Juan became a test for me. I tried to keep my distance to avoid situations in which I could be alone with him, but sometimes it was inevitable. I felt trapped between two worlds. On one hand, there was the affection and attention that Juan gave me, something that my ego craved. On the other hand, there was my love for Mateo, the deep connection that we had shared for years. The internal battle between what I wanted and what I knew was right was consuming me. Situation finally reached its breaking point one afternoon, when Mateo surprisingly suggested that we all go on a family trip together. The idea terrified me. Spending days
in the same house with Juan, with the opportunity to be alone, filled me with panic, but I couldn't refuse without raising suspicions. So with my heart in my hand, I accepted the invitation, fearing what might happen during that trip. I knew I had to find a way to end this dangerous game before everything completely fell apart. The tension and fear had become unbearable, and I couldn't allow my relationship with Mateo, my own integrity, to be further affected. My emotions were in constant chaos, and I couldn't help but wonder if this situation had been orchestrated by fate, or if I myself had contributed to this dilemma. I knew that I had to take a decision, and I had to make it soon before the game came to its inevitable and destructive end. But what I didn't know was how complicated it would become when the truth finally came to light on the day of the trip to the cabin in the middle of the forest finally arrived. My nerves were on edge as I made preparations for the trip. My mind was full of worries and unanswered questions. How I was going to deal with Juan in such an intimate setting. Could I keep my distance and prevent things from getting out of hand? Mateo was excited about the trip, oblivious to my anxiety, and I felt guilty for not sharing his enthusiasm, but I couldn't get the worry out of my head. I tried to behave as normal as possible as we packed our things and got into the car. The ride to the cabin was tense. Juan was at the wheel, and every time his gaze fell on the rearview mirror and met mine, I felt a knot in my stomach. It was as if he was wishing for something that I could not allow myself to give him. We arrived at the cabin, a beautiful place surrounded by trees and nature. At first glance, everything seemed perfect for a family vacation, but I knew that the tension was ready to explode at any moment we settled into the cabin, each choosing his room. Juan made sure that his room was right next to ours, which only increased my anxiety. I knew that I had to be careful, that any misstep could lead to a disaster throughout the day. I tried to keep myself busy helping with the chores and participating in family activities, but every time I found myself alone with Juan, the atmosphere became charged with tension. His looks and gestures were more and more suggestive, and I felt I tried hard to keep my distance at night. We all gathered around a cat. The darkness of the forest surrounded us, and the flickering flames seemed to dance in the middle of our shadows as we shared stories and laughter. I tried to relax and enjoy the moment, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down. It was then that I noticed Juan was sitting close to me, his legs brushing mine deliberately. His gaze, ardent, met mine on several occasions, and the tension in the air was unbearable. My heart was beating hard, and I felt a mixture of fear and excitement that confused me even more when it was time to go to sleep. I felt emotionally exhausted. I went up to my room, trying to process everything that had happened during the day. I knew that this situation could not continue, that I had to find a way to end it before it was too late. I lay down on the bed, staring at the dark ceiling of the room. My mind was spinning, trying to come up with a plan to face this situation without destroying with Mateo. But no matter how hard I thought, I could not find a solution. Clara. The dilemma.
I found myself and was more complicated than I could have ever imagined. I was caught in a dangerous game that I did not know how to get out of, and while I was trying to get out of finding answers, I realized that time was running out. The next chapter of this story would be crucial, and I couldn't help wondering if I would be able to find a way out before everything completely collapsed. The cabin in the middle of the woods had a different atmosphere, as if nature itself was watching our dangerous game after that tense night around the campfire. I hoped things would calm down, but the tension persisted the next day. I decided to get up early and take a shower to clear my mind. The cabin had a small bathroom, and the shower had a curtain that looked a little old and transparent. Let's make sure no one was awake before I entered, or at least that's what I thought. As the warm water fell over my body, I got lost in my thoughts trying to find a solution to this mess. But then something happened that made me lose my breath. The shower curtain moved suddenly, and when I turned to look, there was Juan, my father-in-law, standing staring at me. Without any shame, it was a moment of absolute surprise. My eyes met his, and although his expression was a feigned surprise, I knew it had not been an accident. His eyes were running over my naked body, and I felt a wave of heat and shame quickly. I tried to cover myself with my hands and screamed, "What are you doing here?" I said. Trying to keep my voice firm despite the humiliation, Juan quickly backed away, as if he had been caught in the middle of something he should not have done. "Oh, I am so sorry," Luisa said hastily. "I thought there was no one here. It was an accident, but I knew it had not been an accident." The way he looked at me with his lustful gaze. All of that could not have been a mistake, but it was not. I couldn't confront him at that moment. No. As long as I was naked and vulnerable, I demanded that he leave the room, and he finally did. Although his apology sounded more like an excuse. I stayed under the shower for a long time after he left, feeling a strange mix of anger, confusion, and something else that I didn't want to admit. I finally dried myself off and got dressed, but I couldn't get that image out of my head. The look of desire in Juan's eyes had turned something on in me. Something that made me feel uncomfortable and guilty. Why had he affected me that way? After that awkward incident in the shower with my father-in-law, my mind was a mess. I couldn't believe what had happened. And the worst of all was that a part of me had felt something more than surprise. At that moment, I had been attracted to him, and that scared me after breakfast. My mother-in-law, my boyfriend, and his younger sister decided to go for a walk to explore the surroundings of the cabin. I was feeling exhausted from the tension of the last few days, and decided to stay behind, making sure everyone thought I needed a nap. I told my boyfriend not to worry, to enjoy the walk without me. I lay down on the bed, trying to relax, but my mind kept flashing back to what had happened in the shower at that moment. Something in me woke up. I felt full of forbidden thoughts. While I was half asleep, I noticed something strange. I felt a hand sliding gently under the sheets and up my leg. I opened my eyes suddenly and turned towards the source of that unexpected contact. To my surprise and horror, there was my father-in-law with a look of burning desire in his eyes. My heart began to beat strongly, and I was speechless. Juan approached me, and before I could protest or pull away, he kissed me passionately. My thoughts and doubts turned to confusion and lust. I knew it was wrong, that I shouldn't let myself get carried away by this, but there was something about the way he touched me and kissed me that made me feel alive, in a way I can't explain. The kiss became more passionate, and our hands began to explore each other's bodies. We were in the middle of an intense mutual attraction, and even though I knew it was, I was betraying my boyfriend, and that this was completely out of place. I couldn't help but give in to the overwhelming desire I felt at that moment. Juan caressed me with expert hands, and with his lips running over my neck and my breasts, I felt trapped in a kind of feverish dream, where the rules and morality had disappeared. Passion took hold of us, and at that moment, we weren't family. We were two desperate lovers when we finally both reached the peak. Reality hit me again. Hard. I separated abruptly from Juan, with my breathing ragged and my mind in chaos. I knew that what we had done was wrong, that I had crossed a line that I should never have crossed. Juan, with an expression of guilt on his face, he apologized once more and left the room. I stayed there feeling dirty and guilty. How could I have come at this point? What were you going to do now? I quickly got dressed and sat up in bed trying to gather my thoughts. I knew I had to face what had happened and make difficult decisions. I couldn't keep allowing this to continue, but I also couldn't ignore the fact that I had feelings for my father-in-law. Time passed, as I struggled with my emotions and my moral dilemmas. When my boyfriend, his sister, and my mother-in-law returned, I pretended that nothing had happened, but inside my mind was still tormented by what had happened. I didn't know how I was going to face the consequences, how I was going to repair the broken relationships, and above all, how I was going to deal with my own confusion and guilt. After that shocking moment in the cabin with my father-in-law, I found myself in a state of overwhelming confusion. I knew that what we had done was wrong, but I also had to deal with the mixture of emotions I was feeling. I felt guilty, excited, and at the same time afraid of what this meant for my relationship with my boyfriend. I decided not to tell anything about what had happened. It was a secret that I preferred to keep buried deep inside my being. My internal struggle intensified, but I chose to continue as if nothing had happened. I wanted to protect my boyfriend from the truth, and to a certain extent my father-in-law as well. I believed that this was the best way to avoid hurting someone. The days that followed that intimate encounter were strange. My relationship with my boyfriend seemed to have become more tense, although he did not know why. I could not look Juan in the eyes either, and every time we were close, I felt uncomfortable and embarrassed. Despite everything, I could not stop thinking that that forbidden moment in the cabin had been exciting in a way that I had never experienced before. That forbidden adventure with my father-in-law made me question my relationship with my boyfriend. I thought I loved him, or was just with him out of habit. I realized that there was something in the passion and desire that I had shared with Juan that made me feel more alive than I had felt in a long time. But I also knew that I could not continue down that path. Infidelity was dangerous territory, and although I was attracted to him, I knew that it was not the right path. I promised myself that I would never allow something like that to happen again. I had to focus on my relationship with my boyfriend and find a way to overcome this crisis. Little by little, I began to distance myself from Juan. I avoided situations in which we were alone, and I tried to maintain a neutral attitude in his presence. However, despite my efforts to return to normal, the tension persisted in the air. My boyfriend, for his part, noticed the change in my attitude and began to ask questions. I tried to evade his interrogations and told him that I was just going through a difficult time. I did not want to hurt him even more by revealing the truth. The days became weeks, and although my relationship with my boyfriend continued on the surface, there was something broken in us. It was difficult to connect as before, and our arguments were more frequent. It seemed that our relationship was slowly falling apart, and I did not know how to fix it in my mind. I kept repeating to myself that I had made a terrible mistake, but I also knew that I should learn from him. Infidelity never leads to anything good, and I had crossed a line that I should never have crossed. The story of my clandestine affair with my father-in-law became a constant reminder of the mistakes we can make when we give in to temptation. As time went by, my boyfriend and I decided to take a different path. Our relationship had changed irreparably, and although it was painful, we realized that it was the best for both of us. I made a mistake, but I also learned a valuable lesson that I will always carry with me. Thank you for being part of this captivating story of infidelity. If you want to continue enjoying and exploring other exciting stories, you can read more. Video subscribe. Click on the subscribe button to receive instant updates of our upcoming stories.